Well, howdy, folks. This is the July 14th iteration of the weekly OpenJS security collab space. Everybody is welcome to join in. Uh, we're a friendly group. So the agenda for today, we have a couple of items, and let me hop in and drop the notes document right here. Um, I think the first item that came up, and this was an item that Ben asked to be put on the agenda, that I don't have a ton of background in, but I think maybe Raf or Ulysses might have more. I forget, but apparently there was a change in the GitHub UI recently that exposed the fact that folks with write access to repositories have more access to information like secrets than was apparent in the UI before, even though that access was always available in via APIs. And this caused a little bit of churn. So with that, Raf, are you the best person to speak
Oh,
to this?
It's not only
okay.
API, right? It's you can just push a file to a branch and read the secret in the environment.
No. Actually, the the problem was that people with write access to a repository can change secret value. Now, it was always possible via API, but now they enable that via GitHub UI. So everybody that has write access to a repository will see the settings tab in the repository now, and they will be able to view the secret key, not the secret value, unless they push it to a branch. And they can also change its value, which also could lead to another vulnerability. From the Node.js side, our statement was we trust in the collaborators with write access to to the repository, so we won't do any remediation on that. Uh, it's also worth to mention that if someone changed the secret, it will appear in the audit log from GitHub, so you can track it down at least. But yeah, that's what we found last week. It was an undocumented change. It just appeared from a day to another day, and then that's why people was a bit concerned about it.
Yeah, it's not worth spending more than 30 seconds explaining, but I'm not actually sure how being able to put a new secret in would be a vulnerability. It could certainly be like, I guess, a denial of service in that it would make things break, but like, is that it? Or is there something more than
I
that?
was, yeah, I was imagining some repositories, for instance. I imagine that Node.js.org also stores the database environment there. And if someone attempts to do a login and you change that database login to my own database, I would be able to get the login and password, for instance. But it's all about trusting in that case.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone with write access can just read the secret value by like pushing a file up. So it's like I think that has to be an understood uh risk,
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
implied risk. Yeah.
Uh, they specify that we could create a custom roles for that, but they don't have a granular access for that because we could create a write access and a secrets access, so they don't have access to push to their own branch unless they fork, so they won't be able to read the secrets. But this is not very clear from GitHub side.
Yeah. Also, I think the custom roles requires enterprise access. And if so, open source developers aren't going to be familiar with it. And so there's some sort of intrinsic risks in trying to use that as a system. Unless GitHub decides to start giving enterprise to open source for free.
Yeah, I think when I initially heard about this, there was a concern that like because this wasn't apparent in the UI before, folks might be very surprised to find this out. Um, and be have been more permissive with right access than they originally maybe meant to be. But for what it's worth, this was the reason why having a specific list and a policy of continue of um, being very purposeful with who has right access to your repositories is a part of the compliance guide, specifically because of this. Um, and yes, I believe, Jordan, you're right that the more granular access controls that we're talking about here are gated behind the enterprise licenses. Cool. Is there any given this, I guess, is does it make sense for the cloud space to take any action on this for the foundation, like to let people know, hey, FYI, in case you didn't actually realize what this meant, this is what it means. Um, or um, it's just good for us to be aware of, but we don't have to, take a educational or public service announcement angle to this.
Considering all of this was already possible via API, I think we don't need to take any action on this.
Okay, cool. That sounds good to me. Um, Anyone else have any thoughts or on the topic? Awesome. Okay, cool. So it sounds like no need to take any specific action, um, but I think it'll be interesting to see if there's any consequences to this for folks that did not realize it, as folks suddenly see the settings tab available to them. So it'll be that'll be interesting, but I guess we'll see how it goes. Cool beans. Um, if we are done with that topic, then we can move on to the next agenda item, which today is going to be about the secure releases guide. Um, Anything else, folks, before we move on?
Um, I don't think it needs to come first, but it would be cool if we had at least a few minutes later to talk about um what I posted last week about somebody created a CVE for code that was in a GitHub repo that had not been released. Um, so yeah, I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on that, but I did want to chat about it and see if anybody had any feedback because I'm going to be bringing this to the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group, which contains people that are on this CVE board, because I'm going to propose a rule change unless somebody can point me to something in the existing rules that is intended to cover this in substance or in spirit. Anyway, we just have like an
I mean,
informal chat about it.
Let's talk about it now, Chris. That sounds like a good
Okay.
agenda item.
So,
I,
okay,
I
so let me
oh,
just
go
give
ahead.
some background in case people miss that. And as I'm saying that, if you want to check out the security channel, it's the newest message there. So it's CNA, but I'll give a brief overview. So a CNA basically contacted the maintainer of this project saying, hey, there's this security issue, and the maintainer responded, I think pretty quickly, saying that they would look into it and get back to them. And then lo and behold, very shortly thereafter, they are getting alerts that there's been a CVE filed for the issue. So there are definitely some like not great things happening there in terms of like just coordinated disclosure failure. But which is certainly an issue, but I think the existing guidelines cover that. The problem for me on this is just the creating the CVE for code that is unreleased. And I to some extent I do understand the well, it was merged into I don't know if it's merged into the default branch or what, but like you can't assume that projects, what the branch means. Is that like the production branch or not? Is that the in development branch? Is it going to be released directly from there? You never know what that looks like either. But that's, I guess, secondary to the fact that it had not been released. And I think if there's a precedent set for now, we're going to be able to publish CVEs for unreleased code, I think that's going to just be a huge nightmare for open source. And yeah, Jordan.
Okay, so publishing the details of a vulnerability before the maintainer has like confirmed that it is in fact one, obviously that's just like that should already be against the rules if it's not. Like that's the point of talking to maintainers, like you said, coordinated disclosure. So that is the primary problem here. If like a rule change around unreleased code would only, I think, make sense if the problem was that the maintainer said it's not a it's a vulnerability, but it was never released, so it shouldn't be a CVE, and then the CNA disagreed and published it anyway. But it didn't get to that point. But separately is that I think it really depends on the ecosystem and even sometimes the project, because there are some JavaScript projects that are intended to be consumed from GitHub, and not all of them do the correct thing of only telling you to consume from a tag. Like I've had hundreds of people on NVM ask me to just, why do you put a version tag in the URL? Can't you just put master and like always install the latest version? And my reply to them is no, because sometimes I intentionally break master to test things and you should not ever be installing from it. I'm being hyperbolic a bit. I don't really intentionally break it, but I do accidentally break it. But like, I think that it is like that a CVE could be appropriate for a vulnerability that is present in something that is in a place that the project endorses consumption from. And so like maybe that's covered by like you can define the definition of release in that way.
Right.
And then in that case, sure, totally fine. A rule change that covers that. I just wanted to like throw the nuance in there that even though all of my stuff is only released by an npm publish or pushing a git tag to npm, that like there's lots of projects that aren't that clean cut about it.
Yeah, no, that is an excellent point. And that is an important distinction, right? Like, yes, if you are like, if I'm thinking the first thing I thought of was like GitHub Actions, right? Where you are pointing to potentially you're referencing a branch. And by virtue of that, I guess that means that that's released, right? And so, yeah, I do think that that's the important distinction there is if you can say that this project, this code living here in this branch or in this way is therefore released, I can buy that. And I also completely agree with your comments about, not getting, aligned with the maintainer, which is probably the root cause of this. And maybe that is the big failure there, but I don't want to just reduce it to that, because I do think there's something to be said here for at least starting the discussion about what constitutes unreleased code and what is a valid CVE. I could not find any reference at all in the CVE rules. Or this, I always forget if it's the CVE rules or the CNA rules. In any case, I couldn't find anything to the effect of like how the product was published or the distinction between released and unreleased. And I think it's just always been a foregone conclusion that it only applies to released things. And then somebody's going to claim that the fact that the source code is publicly available, that means it's released, if you're taking like a super, super pedantic and literal interpretation of that. But of course, I think it'd be, I would offer that it's completely irresponsible to consider every single branch in every single GitHub repo released code and therefore subject to vulnerability disclosure.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of nuance necessary for this rule to be codified, where it does just seem like the root cause here is that there was no coordination with the maintainer who could easily clarify this and make sure that it gets handled properly to begin with. So I guess the question here is my understanding is that do we did which CNA did issue the CD? Do we was it just the minor folks directly or was it another CNA?
It was VolDB, and it's
So
currently
Vol, sorry,
VolDB,
say oh yeah,
VULDB.
yeah, okay, gotcha.
Um,
So they went kind of rogue on this one then maybe.
yeah, and I don't know. I haven't like researched past anything. Maybe they've said something about it. Maybe they were like, "Oh, my bad, we messed up somehow." I don't know. But so we'll see what shakes out in terms of like the overall conclusion to do a proper post-mortem on this. Um, but yeah, in terms of any proposed rule change, I do think it would be very difficult to get something like, oh, don't publish for unreleased code. But I would be very happy with some kind of like subsection that says consider, like take into consideration where this live. Like if it's not officially released, published anywhere, and it's just code that's sitting out there, like factor this in somehow. And I don't know exactly the best way to phrase that necessarily, but that I think would be helpful. At the same time, if this was purely just a failure on the other end as with just the communication and coordination and it was an accident, then that rule is not going to have any meaningful delta here. But
Mhm.
does it make a difference for things in the future? I don't know. So I'm just going to get that conversation going. In my experience, when I tend to bring these things up to the group, at least when we have a decent size attendance, there's usually other things that have happened that people remember, and so I'm hoping to get a good discussion out of this, if nothing else. I think we meet this week, but anyway, that's it. We can move on unless other folks have any additional thoughts.
It's a fascinating problem. And it just goes to um, really show how important it is for the CNAs to follow the existing guidance on making sure that they're coordinating with the owners of that code because um, having just gone through this process itself, it's very clear that the onus is on the CNA to make sure they're doing their diligence before cutting CBEs. And so that definitely seems like the crux of um, these sorts of problems here, which will never go away, I guess, as long as there are CNAs. But uh, yeah, I'm curious to see how this works out, Chris. I'm looking forward to hearing what y'all come back with.
And as far be it from me to encourage anybody to have to go to more meetings, but for interested parties, this next meeting will be Wednesday, July 23rd at uh, 10 a.m. Central. So
Cool. Well, thanks for bringing this up, Chris. This was a good one. All righty. Next item on the agenda is the comprehensive is the Secure Releases Guide 2.0. So just as a friendly reminder, and I'm dropping a link in here right now. Initially, what we did when we hold on, let me start over. Apologies. So we initially did a kind of brainstorming exercise to talk about, well, what should a secure releases guide 2.0 actually contain? And we came up with a whole heap of things about that. And I can share my screen really quick for posterity's sake. And then after we generated this list, I started working on a package dependencies kind of document. But after people saw where this, like the initial draft was going, that this wasn't really the way we wanted to go. So then we went back and we kind of did a consensus to try to drive some consensus on what should we talk about. And one of the things that came out of that is that we're not going to be able to boil the ocean and do all the topics we talked about at once. And so we opted to um, do incremental updates to the document to flesh it all out. And the initial focus that we agreed on was around basic permissions, like basically authn and auth kind of problems, two-factor, basic security posture stuff to secure packages themselves. And that is what we wound up doing. And there's basically three sections to the first version of the document. One of it's around user accounts and MFA best practices. The other one is around access token best practices, and then permissions management best practices. So that's now, barring any like slight tweaks or typos and things like that in the pull requests, that part's done. And so I wanted to go back to this original brainstorming and see what kind of consensus what the next consensus for a focus area next for this document might be. I thought that there were some really, really good ideas in here originally. There's a lot of different ones, though. There's a lot of different angles. And so after this exercise and seeing how the initial set of consensus items came out, I'm really excited to hear what you all think about a place that we could focus on next. Anybody have any feeling? Well, in the absence of anybody volunteering anything, one of the areas that I was wondering if it made sense for us to focus next on is actual publishing best practices that seem to line up pretty well with with kind of the handling the basics of what folks would really get value out of, and building on the foundation of, okay, now that folks have access to, now we've established how you should have access and and the like to NPM. Now we can potentially talk about the right ways to publish or not publish to NPM. But I'm very open-minded to folks' thoughts here. And I'm going to start calling on people if people don't start volunteering things, because I would appreciate people's thoughts.
Yeah, I need to drop, but I like the publishing to go next. I think that's a good logical step.
Cool. Thanks, Steve.
I'll catch you
I'm
guys later.
curious. Peace out. I'm curious to hear what people's thoughts would be on exactly what that would cover. Initially, when we talked about publishing, we're talking about like local versus CI and CI best practices and the like around publishing. But and then there's stuff that I'm not super informed on, like dry run publishing and the like. Does this make sense to focus on?
Sorry, I was distracted for a minute. Are you saying does publishing make sense to focus on or something else?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have a number of items related to publishing here, but I'm not sure if that's the right place to go next with this guy. And what we had like a lot of ideas here around publishing when we first brainstormed this. Um, but I'm not sure what makes sense to kind of focus on next as best practices. I feel
Well,
like, oh, go ahead.
I feel like in terms of like effort to reward ratio, like we should first focus on, hey, you already have a package. Here's what you should make sure you're doing to keep publishing updates. Because that's a
Mm,
smaller scope. And we can assume some level, like if they have a package and it exists and they know how to type npm publish on it. And like, then we can say, okay, here's the guidance for once you're there, how do you keep going in the securest way? And then once that, like the next iteration, once that chunk is done, then we can talk about how to get to that point. Because that's, I think, a much larger and more complex discussion, more nuanced discussion.
So what would that really look like? I guess I'm not sure what that
So
would
like
mean.
this would be like, okay, so you have a package. How do you make sure you're publishing in a secure way? What should you check? And it's going to be like, here's a checklist of stuff. Make sure you're doing these things. If you're publishing from CI, do this stuff. If you're not publishing from CI, do this stuff.
Mm,
Um, before you publish, double check the semver of whatever you're about to publish, like, etc. Um, just all the stuff where it's like to course correct an existing maintainer who may or may not have known the correct way to do all these things, or the not even correct, the way we recommend that these things be done, and we're going to give them those recommendations. um, and then because then we have created a funnel for onboarding existing maintainers that is also set up to drop new maintainers into once we've primed them for that. And
got
there's a
it.
lot less nuance at that point. Whereas like stuff about picking a package name, starting a brand new repo, like that's a lot more bike sheddy and nuanced.
I see your point. Yeah, I really like that angle, Jordan. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, in terms of publishing best practices here, the ideas that are at least captured here initially. So, um, I'm curious to hear, like, would that be inclusive of publishing local versus CI?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would.
And we
What
don't
about?
necessarily have to push them in a direction there, but we have
Yeah.
to say, if you are publishing locally, check this stuff. If you are publishing
Mhm.
from CI, check this stuff. And we'll talk about caveats and stuff in each of
Yeah.
those sections, but it's like um, step one is defining the paths. Step
Yeah.
two for us can be recommending a path, but like there are people who are doing one or the other of those two who aren't likely to change based on our recommendation, and we should at least make sure that we have a clear guide for those people to do the right thing.
I see. So it actually sounds like there's two different changes here. There's one is best practices for when you're publishing locally, and best practices when you're publishing um, via CI.
Well, I mean, there is so I'd say the chunk I described, a
Mm,
piece of it is forked into
right.
local versus CI. But like
Yeah.
that only applies to where you're typing the npm publish command and what extra stuff you need to think about in each of those forks. But like there's a bunch of other things like the semver stuff, or
You're all
setting
right.
up
Yeah.
team access if it's in an npm org, or and like there's going to be other forks in there. Like, do you have one maintainer? Do you have more than one maintainer? Like if you have one maintainer, you're probably good with this stuff. If you have more than one maintainer, you might want to make an npm org and manage it this way. And like kind of I'm seeing this chunk as more of a um we're like, you're going to keep doing what you're already doing. Here's how to do that more securely.
Yeah.
And we're
Well,
not really going to be trying to push anyone in a direction. We're just going to be like I'm just going to like give you the proper guardrails and get you going a little smoother in the direction you're already going.
got it.
That's
That
what I'm
sounds
envisioning
good.
anyway. It doesn't have to be that. That's
Yeah.
just
So
what I'm doing.
that does sound really good. So I think um, so I'm trying to think about what kind of topics would be included before that gate. or that fork that we haven't covered already. So we've already covered like permissions and
Mhm.
how to organize your npm orgs
That's true.
and teams and the like that. So is this instead like what's the appropriate way to get to the point of typing npm publish regardless like before the fork? What would be involved in that beside like basics like make
Well,
sure you're using
I don't.
server?
I mean, yes. I mean, monitor the like understand if the changes are breaking or not, or additive or not,
Mm,
or like a very light guide or guide slash reminder to like, hey, make sure you know what you're doing with how you're bumping the release. Um, we could talk about backports. Make sure that we don't even have to fill in that section for now. We can just say if the version you are publishing is later than every version that's already published, proceed. Otherwise, we will eventually have a backport section for you to read, right? And like
mm.
just make sure that point out that that's a different category if you're publishing something that's not the latest. um and like there's the other stuff on that list, right? I think we can just kind of go through it and figure out how to segment off the 80% of it and explicitly call out that we're going to talk about the 20% later and keep it on our list. But like just kind of we have to have something, right? And so let's just focus on kind of paving the garden paths of the primary use cases for the people already walking them. Not to get too poetic.
Okay, cool. So I hear backports, breaking changes. Let's see, local. Oh, I don't have to do it like that. Well, let's see, what else do we have in the brainstorming related to this? CI best practice, right? Tests, tools to use. All right. One day, strike through will be a first class citizen in UIs. We can all dream of that day. Yeah, definitely. I'm just trying to make sure we have like some good like house cleaning here so I can start putting stuff together. Um, is this also a good time to talk about dependency management since we're talking about publishing?
I mean, I think that's sort of separate, right? Like dependency management is part of the changes you do
Mm,
to put it like before a release.
got it. Okay,
I
fair
mean, we
enough.
do eventually want to talk about it, but it's like to keep scope down. I was assuming that we would just say, no, you're about to publish your release. What should pause for a second, do this stuff,
Mm,
and make sure, and then you're in good shape.
got it. Okay. Um, does looking through the original ideas, does unpublishing make sense to talk about here? That does seem relevant to in
I mean, we
the
could briefly allude to it, but it's,
Mm.
I mean, you can't unpublish anything if you have enough users on your package, and it doesn't take
Mhm.
much to hit that, like
Oh, yeah.
that amount. And it's like if you have any dependents of your package, something like that. So it's like it's fine to reference that, you know, if you will be able to you will only be able to unpublish if nobody's using your package yet. We'll talk about that in a future guide. But like,
Mm.
I think that's all we need to say, because I think we should assume that most people can't unpublish.
That's actually a really good call out. It seems like educational for folks, just as an FYI, in case they mess up, basically.
Right. Like a sentence is enough to give them something to Google
Yeah.
without us needing to go into depth about it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What about dry run publishing? Honestly, I don't know a lot about this. Does that make sense to talk
Yeah, I
about
think
in this
so, because
case?
we can tell people, regardless of where you're publishing, do a dry run, see what
Hmm.
files are included, like make sure that all the scripts run and are correct. You know, I think that's a big part of it.
Okie doke.
We can also talk about not just dry run publishing, but dry run packing, and be like, you know, you can do npm pack dry run, and it, in theory, should, like, that's what should create the tarball. Because then we can allude to the fact that most people's pre-published scripts should actually be pre-packed scripts.
Mm. Okay.
I'm not sure. Sorry,
Mhm.
I just thought of this because the file's included, and I'm not sure if this is something for this guy, but I'm trying to remember. Jordan doesn't like the files blob array in package JSON,
Yeah, that's right.
and you
And I think
prefer to
we
do what instead?
npm ignore. In other words, and I think we should mention these caveats, but we don't have to be persuasive in either direction. But the if you know, we should just say there are two approaches: a, you know, inclusion list and an exclusion list. If you use the inclusion list approach, you're using the file key, and if you forget a file in that list, the consequences are your downstream users are broken. You know, if you go with the exclusion list approach, the downsides are if you forget a file in that list, then your users get an extra file that they don't need. And, you know, this might be a problem if it contains secrets or is particularly large, right? Because those are really the trade-offs between the two. And then say, if you're doing files, you know, do this. If you're doing npm ignore, do this. And then when they get to the dry run step, that will show them what files are included, at which point they can go tweak whichever mechanism they're using to have the correct files. And I'm fine also if we never are attempting to push people in a direction with these types of things. All of our quirks of which way we prefer to do things should only apply here, in that they make sure that they're given equal affordance and not right, like I don't, like there's a lot of people that don't like files as the default. So for example, there's a lot of people that don't even know there's another way to do it, and it's never even occurred to them there's a different way, and they sort of react weird when you're saying don't do it that way. So we just need to make sure that they're informed that there's other ways, and then they can make whatever choice they want.
Right, and it always involves a trade-off, right? Being
Yeah.
additive versus subtractive for these things. They can lead to
Yeah,
different
exactly.
problems in different ways. Yeah, and you just have to decide which problems would you rather have.
Exactly right. And I think as long as we've explained what those problems are, and people can make their own choice, and that's fine. We can't do more than that.
Cool.
See
This actually
also
sounds.
action pinning.
Sorry, say that again.
I just tongue in cheek said see also action pinning.
Yeah, action
Mm.
pinning, where you publish locally versus CI. There's a lot of these sorts of things. And so like our job is to make sure that whatever they're picking, they're doing it the best way possible, and that they understand
Right.
what the trade-offs are. And, you know, I don't think we need to go beyond there unless there's like actually a huge security risk of one of the choices. And, at that point, I can write a blog if I want to rant about it.
Well, here I put kind of everything that seems like we've talked about so far from the brainstorming in here, and I'll try to clean this up to look more like this as I kind of go through this. Is there anything in this list that just to make sure I haven't overcommitted here that doesn't make sense or should be specifically called out maybe in this list? And we don't necessarily have to do this in the meeting right now, but I'd appreciate folks taking a look at this and providing any comments or adding any specific topics or items that should be in here. But I can take this and start cleaning it up while you all have a chance to do that. So just a friendly reminder, here's the doc again, and I will also see action items. Uh,
One thing that I didn't find in the document, but I believe that's something that everybody knows. I don't know if it makes sense to mention that, is to enable the 2FA to publish the package.
Yeah, that's
yes.
absolutely the sort of thing that should be in this chunk of the guide is like, go check to make sure that you can't publish the package unless you have 2FA on, which is like a separate setting and, all that.
Yeah.
We do have if that covered
We have the user
under
account one, but there's also a package specific toggle for each package.
yes, which is in here.
Oh,
So where is
so that's fine, but we
Yeah,
should still
yeah.
reference it in this
Oh yeah,
publishing section.
yeah. This is all gonna be in the same document, by
Right.
the way. But yeah, we can explicitly call that out.
Um, Is it something to consider that, for instance, when I inviting someone to the NPM organization, it must match the GitHub handle as well? For instance, uh, I wonder that we are publishing a package, but also as from a user perspective, maybe I'm looking to a package that is linked to a specific GitHub repository, but the author or the one that is publishing that package is not the same one that is authoring the commits in the GitHub project. Is it something that I don't know if that could lead to some inconsistency, but I can see some um, I don't know, in social engineering trick
Ha-
that,
Having them be the same won't solve that though, because there are some people who have them different because someone else had already taken the name. The way you solve that is you go onto your NPM profile and you explicitly link your GitHub account, and then it shows up on your profile.
Okay.
There isn't a two-way to do that, but like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, but I believe that this is from developer's perspective. Doesn't need to
yeah.
be on this document, right?
I mean, we can tell people in here as part of publishing, like, increase your users' confidence by linking your GitHub account to your NPM account. I think that's a
Yeah.
great idea.
mm, awesome. So we're nearly at time. We don't have to go all the way to 30. So I put in the notes here to definitely review the consensus to update items and provide any comments or thoughts or specifics that you think should explicitly be included in these areas. And I will start cleaning up and trying to organize what is here into a nice set of defined items like we had for the first one, which is what I use to build out the initial set of guidance. So cool beans. Thank you, folks. I'm really happy with how the first secure releases guide update looked, and I'm looking forward to us doing more good stuff on this. So thanks in advance. And that's all I've got for today. And with that, toodles and have a lovely week. Take care, folks.
Yeah.
Bye.